we have sacrificed a lot and we went against the flow of our society. Somebody like Ayaan, really courageous and very inspiring, actually, to hear about you, to know that you exist, because sometimes you start to feel, oh my God, I'm alone in this. But we are not alone. It's a destructive force, and everybody promised us self-destruction. They said, that's it. You will be shunned, you will be killed, you won't have a chance even to live. But here we are. We are living, and we are living a much higher potential than any Islamic promise or any actually other human law that promises anything. We live and we continue to inspire others to think for themselves, to doubt, not to be afraid, and to come to freedom.
I'm particularly honored to be here with our guests, Mrs. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Mosab Hassan Yousef, Mr. Douglas Murray, and Dr. Daniel Pipes. So first, just to start from my left side, I will give the floor to Ayaan, and please give your thoughts, your initial thoughts to us. The microphone, please.
Thank you very much. There are a number of people here who are going to run you through the nuances of things. So I think I'm going to start with an unnuanced perspective, rough and quick. There is Islam, and derived out of Islam is a system of government that is pushed by people we have come to call Islamists. My friend Majid Nawaz speaks of Islamism. So what I'd like to do to answer your question is to say, take the Islamism versus liberalism. Liberalism, as I have come to understand and appreciate, not liberalism as, say, someone like wonderful people in the United States of America called Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders in the way they understand. It's a different kind of liberalism. That's not the liberalism I'm talking about. I'm talking about the liberalism of John Stuart Mill, John Locke, that type of classical liberalism. Islamism versus liberalism. Are they compatible? I am of the mind that they are incompatible. Islamism demands submission to God's will above all else. There is an emphasis on the afterlife. There is an emphasis on commanding right and forbidding wrong. Liberalism emphasizes reason and science. The emphasis is on life here and now. And if you're a true liberal, you apply critical thinking and you come to your convictions in a reasoned way. That's one big difference. The second big difference is on Islamism, on the Islamism side of the equation, there is no such a thing as freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. No, no, no. You submit to the will of God, and if you just happen to think things that are contrary to what Islamic scripture prescribes, then you are guilty of blasphemy and you're condemned. Critical thinking is discouraged if it is contrary to God's will, to Muhammad's legacy. On the liberal side of the equation, we value freedom of speech. We debate and we doubt, and debate and doubt are encouraged. And progress and innovation is not only encouraged, it's celebrated. On the Islamism side of the equation, not only is blasphemy and apostasy punishable by death, the way to get your arguments across is through dawah or indoctrination. And if you refuse to accept those, the Jews have done that, Christians have done that, then they are relegated to second-class citizens, if not altogether obliterated. On the liberal side, liberalism side of the equation, we say, well, all religions are equal, whatever. The state does not promote any religion over any other religion, and religions are seen in context, the doctrines, etc. Very often, as you see in Europe, they're even mocked. On the Islamism side of the equation, and this is just to wake you up, it's been always cruel and unusual punishments is something human and universal. But in Islamism, there is a justification for that. The beheading, the amputations, etc. Punishments such as stoning and flogging, and even slavery is permitted, as long as you're doing things according to God's law. On the liberalism side of the equation, torture, inhumane punishments, that's condemned. Slavery is abolished. Individuals have autonomy over their own body and over their own sexuality. And in fact, we've had a long-standing debate over the death penalty, and I think some states in the United States haven't adopted them, but in general, you will find most liberals saying death penalty should be removed. And finally, when it comes to Islamism, group rights have precedence. It's the interests of the Ummah, or those who believe, the tribe of believers. Value lies with the family and the honor. On the other side, liberalism, it's all about human life, the individual, regardless of their sex, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their age. That's what we need to protect. And in liberal societies that actually take themselves seriously, we protect the rights of minorities. I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Ayaan. I will ask the historian of the panel, Dr. Daniel Pipes, to respond to that and give your initial thoughts in this regard.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be in Hungary, where there's no danger of being deplatformed. If you know that verb, to be deplatformed means to be thrown off of social media or thrown out of the hotel room that you have booked. So glad to be here, and we can speak freely about Islam and democracy. Now, the impression exists that Muslims suffer disproportionately from non-democratic governments, tyrants, dictators, unelected presidents, kings, emirs, and various other strongmen. Is this accurate? Well, it is. A careful analysis some years ago by a scholar named Frederick Pryor of Swarthmore College found that in all but the poorest countries, quote, Islam is associated with fewer political rights. So this is the ground base for the problem. There is a lack of democracy among Muslims. The fact that majority Muslim countries are less democratic makes it tempting to conclude that the religion of Islam, their common factor, is itself incompatible with democracy. But history is full of surprises. I remind you that as late as 1892, Germans were described as obscure and impractical dreamers. As late as the 1960s, it was held that Jews do not fight. Confucianism for many centuries was seen as inimical to economic growth. My point is that just as something, in these cases, because something is obvious today does not mean it'll be true tomorrow. I'm a historian, and the historian studies change over time. Time could find things different. Muslims today indeed groan under dictatorships, but one day they could be model democrats. Further, Islam can be interpreted in many ways, and there's nothing about it that immutably contradicts democracy. That said, there are deep and extensive changes that have to precede such a shift. Today's Muslim predicament reflects historical circumstances more than the innate features of Islam. That's my central point. Today's Muslim predicament reflects historical circumstances more than the innate features of Islam. For example, the tensions between the Muslim world and the West. Put differently, Islam, like all pre-modern religions, is undemocratic in spirit. No less than the other major religions, however, it has the potential to evolve in a democratic direction. This won't be easy. Let me cite to you the Christian case. The battle to limit the Catholic Church's political role lasted for a painfully long time. The transition began when one of my favorite thinkers of all time, Cilio of Padua, published his Defensor Pacis in the year 1324, just about the time this Buddha began, the castle of Buddha began. It took another 6 centuries after 1324 for the Catholic Church finally to reconcile itself fully to democracy. So if it took the Catholic Church 6 centuries, why should it be faster, easier, smoother for Muslims? To render Islam consistent with democratic ways will require profound changes in the interpretation of Islam. In particular, as Ayaan just pointed out, the Sharia lies at the core of the problem. Developed over a millennium ago, it presumes autocratic rulers and submissive subjects. It emphasizes God's will over popular sovereignty and encourages violent jihad to expand Islam's borders. Further, it undemocratically, or even anti-democratically, privileges Muslims over non-Muslims, males over females, and free persons over slaves. For Muslims, To build fully functioning democracies, they basically must reject the Sharia's public aspects. Ataturk forcefully did that in Turkey a century ago, but others have offered more subtle approaches. You heard Ayaan speak earlier today about the Mecca and Medina qualities of Islam. A Sudanese thinker by the name of Mahmoud Muhammad Taha came up with the idea that Islam should be restricted to its Meccan ideas and it should throw out the Medinan ideas, that is to say, no more Sharia. Ataturk's efforts and Taha's ideas imply that Islam is ever-evolving, and to see it as unchanging is a great mistake. My favorite expression of this is from the Egyptian philosopher Hassan al-Hanafi, who said that the Quran, quote, is a supermarket where one takes what one wants and leaves what one doesn't want. Islam's problem is less its being anti-modern than the fact that the process of modernization of Islam has hardly begun. Muslims can modernize their religion, but that will take a lot of work. 1, it means no more waging jihad to impose Muslim rule. 2, no second-class citizenship for non-Muslims. 3, no death sentences for blasphemy, and so on. On the other hand, it requires individual freedom, civil rights, political participation, popular sovereignty, equality before the law, representative elections, and the like. Now, several obstacles stand in the way of achieving these changes. Perhaps the most significant is the Islamist movement, which has become so strong in the past 50 years. It seeks the opposite of reform and modernization. Namely, it seeks to reassert the Sharia in its entirety. The most spectacular expression of this was ISIL-Daesh in the last few years in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. These jihadis may spell out their goal more forcefully and directly than others, but they all have the same goal. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, has the same goal ultimately as ISIS, though he goes for it in a much less extreme way. Islamists respond in 2 ways to democracy. First, they denounce it as un-Islamic. For example, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, considered democracy to be a betrayal of Islamic values. The Brotherhood theoretician, Sayyid Qutb, rejected popular sovereignty, as do Abu Ala al-Maududi, founder of Pakistan's Jamaat-e-Islami. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the current sage of the Muslim Brotherhood, has argued that elections are heretical. Despite this scorn for democracy, however, point 1, now point 2, Islamists are eager to use elections to attain power and have proven themselves to be very agile and able vote-getters. Even a terrorist organization like Hamas has won elections. This record does not show that the Islamists are democratic, but it indicates their tactical flexibility. As Erdogan himself put it, democracy is like a streetcar. When you come to your stop, you get off. So hard work can one day make Islam democratic. In the meanwhile, Islamism represents the world's leading anti-democratic force that must be fought and defeated.
Thank you, Daniel. Coming from a radical Muslim background, I think Mosab Hassan Yousef has a special perspective to the issue. And would you please share your preliminary thoughts with us?
I don't know about special perspective. First of all, good evening. I'm really surprised that you are not all asleep already. You must be desperate for truth tonight. But the truth of today is not as the truth of yesterday. I'm not expert on the topic. I have lived it. Islamic, what's so-called Islamic Sharia is basically the Islamic law. People say Sharia law. It's like it's the same term, basically. Sharia means law. It's the Islamic legislation. And basically, it's concerned of details that paralyze the individual and their creativity and their ability to be intelligent and to think, to doubt, to create. You have to follow those rules. Like, for example, which leg you enter the bathroom. Is it the right one or the left one? Which leg you leave the bathroom? Like, for example, a Muslim has to enter the bathroom with his left leg, and a Muslim has to leave the bathroom with his left leg, not his right leg. This is the Islamic law. Are we really discussing this 7th century garbage tonight and staying up late for this kind of crap? You know, it's really crazy. But I don't know, there must be like great fear behind this. And we are afraid that the Islamic law is going to replace democracy. And actually, I don't know who compared democracy to the Islamic law and afraid that the Islamic law is going to take over the Western democracy. Well, first of all, the Western democracy already failed of solving the human condition, that we don't see things for what they are. And I doubt that the majority of the free world will agree for the Islamic law to take over. So, first of all, I don't see a threat. Second, in principle, the Islamic Sharia or Shura or whatever we are concerned about is only for men. Look at all the Islamic councils or Shura councils, movements, organizations, even if it exists in governments, where are the women? You know, this is inspired by one event before the death of Muhammad, the founder and the prophet of Islam, when he asked his friends, all of them were men, about a couple of issues. And there were no women, only men, which means that 50% of the society is out of this. How can we call that democracy? This is like the Vatican's vote, you know, for who's going to be the next pope. And we call that this is democracy. It's within the Islamic house. It's affiliated with Islamic nonsense. It's not even suitable for animals. And honestly, I don't allow myself to go down to this level to discuss this matter. But unfortunately, you don't have the knowledge. You haven't lived it. And what really feel sorry for the people who spend time studying the thing. And it's like a rabbit hole, you know, going into this hole and the other hole does not have an end to it. Islam is not going to take over, and it cannot replace democracy. And we should not be afraid of it. We should honestly laugh at it, because it's just a bunch of stupid ideas that did not work in the 7th century and are not going to work for the 21st century. Trust me. And thank you for listening, and thank you for staying with us tonight.
Douglas, how far have we went down to the rabbit hole?
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be back. Let me just give an example of where this subject hits the road in a country in Europe. Because in Britain, we've been going through a bit of this discussion for some years now. It's just over a decade since the Archbishop of Canterbury in the UK, former Archbishop of Canterbury now, Rowan Williams, gave a speech in London that was delivered with his normal style, which was a style that very silly people think is clever. And people left the room saying, wasn't that brilliant? Because they didn't really know what he'd said. And when they actually did work it out, it seemed that he had made this comment, which he had made, about Sharia law having to have a place in Britain in the future. And he was asked about it the next day on the radio. And he got himself into a much bigger problem because he made this point absolutely clearly. And he was forced to by the interviewer. And he said, yes, there should be a place for Sharia law in the future in Britain. And it was a very interesting period because there was a massive backlash against the Archbishop. Furious backlash, I think, in the papers and in the public square. And there were several different debates going on, actually. The first one was that part of the public heard him saying there should be a future for Sharia in the UK, and they thought, my God, the Archbishop of Canterbury is pro-beheadings in Trafalgar Square, which seemed extreme for the Church of England. And was not a good way to get the people on side. But that's what part of them heard. In actual fact, to do him justice, there's no particular reason to do him justice, but to do him justice, that was not what the Archbishop was arguing. What he seemed to be saying was that that just as the churches can have their own administrative arbitrational bodies, so in the future Muslims should have theirs, and that this was what he was meant. He was not pro-beheading. He was pro something of Sharia in British life, and that if you have very large Muslim populations such as we have in the UK, that was basically a statement of the obvious, that Sharia was going to have a place. What was interesting about this is it was another one of the set of very swift learning curves, which I think every country has been on in recent decades when they've had to come across these issues. I've often asked in the UK, did anybody until Valentine's Day 1989 know what a fatwa was, or that it could be issued, or what it might be issued over? I've never found any politician in Britain who advocated migration, mass migration, saying at some point some of our novelists will be murdered, but, take the rough with the smooth. And no one ever did say that. They never saw it coming. Just like we never saw coming that cartoons in Scandinavia would be a huge issue suddenly, and that embassies would be burned around the world and so on. And the Archbishop's comments just over a decade ago were another very swift learning curve, because suddenly everyone tried to find out, what is this thing, the Sharia law that's going on? And what was interesting was that the discovery, I think, that the public made was at the same time horrifying and slightly less horrifying than they first thought. The horrifying bit was, yes, there were some dozens, now scores of Sharia courts operating in the UK, but, and this is quite an important detail, they were able to operate and are able to operate in the UK because of an arbitration act, which exists in British law, which allows two parties to volunteer for an arbitration, and that so long as the arbitration is judged, and it can be judged in a Sharia court or in a liturgical court, or indeed there's one case of a biker gangs where there was an arbitration between two biker gangs, and that this was able to be arbitrated under the law of the land. And this is the crucial thing, is that so long as the judgment of the court, whatever type of court it is, does not contravene British law, it's permitted. So you couldn't...
They can actually choose between the jurisdiction?
No. Yes, you can choose the arbitration court, but you cannot, the court itself cannot supersede British law. So, for instance, it could be a family dispute, a marital dispute, possibly. The details matter. Divorce, it could be an issue, as there's one case of the dispersal of a will of a Muslim man who died without leaving clear indications of how he wanted his estate divested. And so long as, so the court, the Sharia court would not be allowed to say the wife must be killed. The British law would not say, fine, that's judgment of the Sharia court or anything like it. But the court, so long as the judgment didn't go against British law, would be allowed. And this was the very interesting bit of the learning curve on this, was that we discovered again the difference between the stated law and practice. And this is what gets so difficult, because the British attitude was, well, as long as the arbitration tribunals don't do anything that supersedes the law of the land, we're not going to step in. But then the questions begin. For instance, how is the Sharia court going to disperse the will of the dead Muslim man other than in accordance with Sharia? And the Sharia is not going to be in accordance with the Human Rights Act and the idea we have in Britain of, for instance, the equality of the sexes. And so it turns out that in that particular case, the judgment is that the daughters of the man get half the money of the brothers because they are women. And then you get the cases where the government has, in my view, my observation, I've spoken to quite a lot of people who've been under these arbitrations, has no way of knowing, for instance, if the woman has genuinely volunteered for the arbitration or not. It's exceptionally hard to decide, and indeed whether she has voluntarily accepted the judgment of the court or not. So this is, I just offer this in a way of perhaps interesting comment about how this lands in a country in Europe. One other thing, if I may, just before, since I mentioned at the beginning, I referred to the Rushdie affair, which, of course, Dr. Pipes wrote a book on around the time, wasn't it? One thing that has often struck me about that is that the Satanic Verses is known as an affair, but very little as a novel. And I'm quite an exponent of it as a novel. Most people don't make their way through it. But it has some terrific passages, and I just wanted to, because you don't get readings from the Satanic Verses often enough, and if you can't do it in Budapest, I don't know where you can. But here's a typically good passage, I think, from the Satanic Verses. Salman the Persian is the name of the man who's taking down the dictation from the Muhammad figure. And Rushdie writes about the man, Salman, who's taking down all this dictation. He says, Salman the Persian finds the prophet spouting rules about every damn thing. If a man farts, let him turn his face to the wind. A rule about which hand to use for the purpose of cleaning one's behind. It was as if no aspect of human existence was to be left unregulated or free. The rules flow. They include dietary laws, the way in which to kill an animal, and the way in which you can have sexual intercourse. And eventually, at one point, Salman the Persian starts to wonder about the origin of this revelation. He says, what manner of God this was that sounded so much like a businessman. And then he says, but of course, Muhammad himself had been a businessman, and a damned successful one at that. A person to whom organization and rules came naturally. So how excessively convenient it was that he should have come up with such a very business-like archangel who handed down the management decisions of this highly corporate, if non-corporeal God.
I would ask Ayaan about some apologists of the Sharia. I was surprised to see that there are quite a few, and they are actually referring to the Quran as a democratic source. They are saying that in the Quran there is the so-called provision of the Shura, which is the provision and requirement of consultation in the Quran, which means that it is obligatory for Muslims in managing their political affairs to engage in mutual consultation. And derived from that, I have a question if there is at all a concept like a religious democracy.
When you put the question that way, is there such a concept as religious democracy? It sounds as if you want me to answer on all religions, which obviously I can't. Yeah, I just want to stick to Islam. I want to stick to what I know. When I listen to very good people who want good things for everyone, who say, I'm a Muslim, I live by Islam, I live by Islamic Sharia, and the people who are doing the bad things, the people who are intolerant to women, intolerant to homosexuals, intolerant to Jews, intolerant to Christians, intolerant to Muslims that don't abide by strict laws. The people who do that, the people who are intolerant are not true Muslims. They don't understand Islam. They misinterpret it. What I do is simply look at, and I said this in my speech earlier tonight, in 2001, I adopted, Mosab, I'm looking at you, I adopted these ideas. I thought everybody who behaved badly and justified their bad behavior using Islamic doctrine was misinterpreting Islam. And then I went and started looking at, the man who walked me up into looking and checking these things off was Osama bin Laden after 9/11. And he had all these citations, and the people he cited, Sayyid Qutb, Hassan al-Banna, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, all these, again, let's not forget on the Shia side, Ayatollah Khomeini. These people are incredibly precise and learned in their interpretations. They take the Quran, they take the Hadith, and beyond. And so when I checked off, did Muhammad really say these things? Are these things really in the Quran? They were accurate. And I want to just remind you all of one thing. Back then, when I was in the 1990s, I was living in the Netherlands. I was a translator and I was an interpreter. And you all live in Europe. And if you go to the European Union right now, you're going to get these little closets where translators and interpreters sit, and you're going to stick something in your ear. And if someone is translating in a way, let's say if they're interpreting whatever the substance is, will be fired in a heartbeat. So as a translator, you are taught to do nothing other than convey the words that are being said. Stick to the substance, the real meaning. And if you go to the real meaning, the substance, you're going to walk away with things that all of us in this room find disturbing. And I'm looking at Daniel Pipes and I'm saying, look, there are so many good Muslims, wonderful Muslims, beautiful Muslims. In fact, I am of the opinion that most Muslims, they're just like us. They want to live in peace. They want to lead peaceful lives. This is all, it's a distraction to the way they want to live. And how are they best served? Because they're being challenged by members of their community who are saying, you cannot be a true Muslim unless you live according to the substance, the true meaning of what is there. Should we then say, well, you're confused to the Medina Muslim, to the person who's what you're seeing is not there. But we can't do that. Why cannot we do that? Because what Western liberal society prides itself on is we were like that as Christians and as Jews and as whatever. We had all our superstitions. We used to burn witches. We were as anti-Semitic as it gets. We had the Inquisition. We had all these terrible things. So what makes the history of Europe and the history of the Enlightenment different from the history of all of these other people in those contemporary times? It is that we got to a place where we said, actually, we are willing to face the truth in all its ugliness, in all its contortions. And based on what we see, we're going to either force ourselves to condone what we see or to condemn it. And if we condemn it, then we're going to move on. We're going to have alternatives. The Catholic Church had, up until the 1960s, an index of books that were prohibited So if the continent of Europe was able to force the institution of the Catholic Church to be ashamed of the fact that they had such an index, what should our attitude be to the Islamists? It is to say, of course you have. This is the substance. These are the ideas you don't like. These are what you condemn. We have better ideas, and we're going to treat you in exactly the same way as we treated the Catholic Church. If we don't do that, we are guilty of the racism of law expectations.
Advancing from what you've just said and analyzing the text, maybe the Hadith and the Sirah, I'm particularly interested in your position and I'm quoting here, stepping into the shoes of the devil's advocate, a professor of the University of Abuja in Nigeria. He said that in Islam, no authority forcibly constituted or acquired by power of swords or arms can have any legitimacy whatsoever. The institution of monarchy or military dictatorship did not exist during the time of the Prophet. They are subsequent developments and were legitimized by the fact that they had to prevent anarchy. And the institution of the monarchy actually crept in under Roman and Christian influence. What do you think of this? And what do you think of the development of Islam?
I think that's a beautiful apologetic. Blame the Romans for the troubles in Islam.
Because they are not here anymore.
If it's not the British or the Americans or the Jews, it's the Romans. That's quite creative, I got to say. I haven't heard the Romans blamed for much for a while. There you go.
Do we already have questions? I see the time is flying shockingly quickly. Already there are questions. Are you willing to go to the questions? Melissa, would you please?
Hello, I'm Melissa O'Sullivan, and I'm from Decatur, Alabama. Hirsi Ali, apologies to you for the fact that the Southern Poverty Law Center, based in Alabama, puts you on their list of anti-Muslim extremist hate speech or something. And is this not from the American left the same thing as blasphemy laws, which you apparently have transgressed?
Thank you very much. And I absolutely do not hold you or anyone else from Alabama for the misconduct of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I think they are going to implode, and it's beginning. I'm afraid I don't want to repeat myself, but like I said, I think at some point we have to get to the substance of this debate, and the substance is what it is. It is for our side to have the courage to stand up for the legacy of freedom, for the legacy of critical thinking, for the legacy of reason, for the legacy of democracy. And if we fail to stand up for it, then we should not be surprised that we are challenged, and we should not be surprised if things fail.
I saw another hand in the air. Please, I'm glad that there are a lot of questions. We still have time for them.
Hello. Good evening. Thank you for coming. Welcome to Budapest. Welcome back. My question is for everyone at the fireside. It's on the likelihood of any kind of reformation within Islam comparable to that seen in Christianity in relation to laws, Sharia, etc.
The question is whether there can be a reformation in Islam as in Christianity. I actually would say the better question, if I might, is can there be a change in Islam as in Judaism? Because Judaism and Islam both have sacred laws, halakha in Judaism, Sharia in Islam. Christianity does not. And the Jews went through the 18th and 19th century a transformation. Some still stick to it entirely, but most modernize the religion. And I think it's completely possible, as you heard me say earlier, that Muslims can make that same transformation. Put it differently, 500 years ago, all three great monotheistic religions allowed some sort of slavery, servitude, and all of them banned in some way interest on money. Two of them changed. Judaism and Christianity are changed. For example, take the issue of slavery. In the United States, we had a very major war over slavery. It was not simple. It was not easy. It was painful. But that has happened, and no one now says, well, on second thought, maybe we should try slavery again. It's over. In Islam, there's been a debate over slavery. There's been a debate over interest on money, but it's just at its beginnings. It's far from being resolved. So Muslims are behind fellow monotheists in making these transitions. I might add that I, too, was on the Southern Poverty Law Center list of 15 anti-Muslim extremists And I congratulate Majid Nawaz for his suing them and getting almost $4 million as reparations. And they took that away, and it's no longer active, and there is no more list of 15 Muslim anti. So,
anything to add, Douglas? Okay, then the next question, please.
I was wondering what you experts would recommend to try and encourage the Muslims who would like to have more freedom to be able to sort of stick their heads above the parapet, because their heads are a bit threatened. And of course, the clerics probably like the big business and don't want their posts minimized.
Douglas, can I make one suggestion? There's one suggestion it's been happening for a little while. Or let me put it this way. 20 years ago in London, a little bit less, there was an event at the London School of Economics, which was an event organized, I think, by the Islamic Society. And somebody stood up. I wasn't actually there myself, but a friend was. Somebody stood up at it and said, as a gay Muslim, and there was just a riot. The event had to stop because everyone was trying to hit the guy, get the guy. So the event was over. I mention this because there's been a similar feeling. I think when Ayaan first rose to prominence in the Netherlands, people couldn't believe that somebody was saying what you were saying. And I mention this because, my gosh, it could have been faster. I wish it had been faster. I wish more people had done it. But a change that exists now is that it's now not uncommon at events I speak at in London and in other parts of Europe and indeed in America to have somebody stand up in the audience and say at some point, as an ex-Muslim. Now, it's not very common. It's not absolutely fine. But my point is that the transgressions across the hardest bits of the boundary, because some people have made them visibly, it has led a way across the wall. And I have no statistical evidences, only the anecdotal one, but it struck me very much in recent years. It's not people sidling up to you after an event and saying, I used to be Muslim, but now I'm not so much. It's a public thing. It's still nerve-wracking. It's still lots of places you wouldn't do it. The point I suppose I wanted to make on this is that we all know that cowardice is catching. One person's very cowardly at the top of a society and everybody else gets the bug. But the opposite is also true. And when people see people saying things that they think might be true, intuit might be true, and are amazed at first, they start to think for themselves a little bit more. And they start to see other people who've made their way across the minefield and survived.
And it's coming along, and I'm just looking at the audience, and I don't know how much you follow world events. So my name is Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and when I open the New York Times and I read about the story of a girl from Saudi Arabia who escapes through Kuwait and Malaysia and asks for asylum in Australia and finds it in Canada, you can just about imagine my delight. And that's a kind of spontaneous thing. And it's happening now over and over again. One or two or three of them make it to the New York Times and the general media, but you know that it's happening. You know that things are moving. And I think that we need to invest more in that than what we've been doing. And I'm going to put Daniel Pipes on the spot, that our governments have been investing more in Islamists and Islamist governments rather than in this type of dynamic.
absolutely true. Islamists are seen as the genuine Muslims, as the ones the Catholic Church wants to have interfaith dialogue with, the ones that the governments want to have work with the police with, and so forth. It is the Islamists who are privileged and the Reform Muslims who are pushed out. It was the Islamists who get the money. Islamic Relief gets money from probably every Western government other than Eastern Europe, Central Eastern Europe. It gets large amounts of money, and it is Islamist. Yes, it's a great problem. And so part of my work, as it is Ayaan's, is to try and win support, financial, psychological, diplomatic, and so forth, media, for the Reform Muslims who are ignored. It's a tragedy. They are the hope of the future. As Ayaan said earlier today, or I'll put in my words, there's a civil war between Muslims. What does it mean to be a Muslim in 2019? Do you want to go back to the 7th century or forward to the 21st century? Do you want to be applying the Sharia, or do you wish to be changing it and just applying selected parts of it? This is the crucial battle, and we who are not Muslims cannot answer those questions, but we can help one side or the other, and unfortunately we're helping the retrograde side of the Islamists, the totalitarian side of the Islamists.
Anybody else? It's the gentleman over there. He said he doesn't want to add anything. Yes, the gentleman over there.
Thank you, Peter Molnar, Radio Tilos. And I would like to ask all of you, but especially Hirsi Ali, you said that you thought, if I recall it well, that you saw that the majority of Muslims, or most would like to live in peace as well and in freedom. So how then would an abuse of what Islam means, or what Islam can mean, turn those Muslims who would like to live in peace and freedom like us into danger in our Europe, considering especially that with all the development in, let's say, Christianity, I mean, mostly Christian Europe managed to produce the biggest horrors of the 20th century, and that includes the Holocaust that not Muslims did.
I came as a Muslim to Europe, and when I came to Europe, my identity in 1992 Europe wasn't, I didn't come in thinking I'm a Muslim, this is Islam versus Europe. I was just a girl running away from the family tradition. And I was lucky enough in the relationships, the immediate relationships that I made, that no one said to me, you've got to respect your family, respect your culture, respect your religion. None of the people who helped me out said that. When I talked to them about my problems, they said, well, it's up to you. If this man has come to get you and you don't want to go with him, let's call the police. But then obvious, what was on the table was, would I then go with the police, or would I go with the man who was chosen for me? I went with the police, and I understood very deeply, I was old enough, that that choice was putting me up in front, I was facing my family, my tribe, my clan, my religion. That's not what's happening today. There are large enough numbers of Muslims. And so when people come to Europe and they are confronted, and it happens on a daily basis, it's a big shock. There's no lie about it. You come from a place like Africa, South Asia, the Middle East, you walk into from Hungary onwards. I mean, it's different. It's a big shock. But if you can disappear into a ghetto of fellow Muslims and fellow ethnic groups, and they can tell you, you can live like you did before you came here, but in peace, you live in the illusion, and the country that you come into with the ghetto lets you live in the illusion. That's the story of immigration from Muslim countries. It's the equation of integration and how we're going to handle it and all of that. Then there's the story of the Holocaust. And that, I have to say to all of you here, and I say to all my Western friends, is number one, the anti-Semitism we are seeing today, most on message, most potent anti-Semitism we see today is Islamist-driven anti-Semitism. There are all kinds of other flavors, white supremacist, left-wing, right-wing, and all the rest of it. But it is the Islamist-driven anti-Semitism that gives all this latent anti-Semitism an excuse to come out of the woodwork. Jeremy Corbyn would never have come out today. He would never have come out today to express what he actually feels about the state of Israel, about Zionism, and about Jews in general. But he can do it now because he can hide behind the Islamist-driven anti-Semitism. So we have to pay attention to that. And that is a different subject altogether, for which I think perhaps tonight I've got to see but I don't want you to, let's not do this. Let's not talk about immigration and integration and the integration of Muslim minorities into European society in one breath with the Holocaust. I don't think you can come off the Holocaust that easily.
Maybe one more question, the gentleman over there. In the interest of time, maybe we'll close the event soon.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity. I was just wondering about the case of Pakistan, which is just like Masjid Nawaz mentioned in your debate. There is a very well functioning parliamentary system. However, Sharia law, since the military regime of Ziaul Haq, 1977, is the rule of the land as well. So on the one hand, we can see a well-functioning parliamentary democracy, just like Masjid mentioned that the majority of people voted for the centrist parties and the Islamists lost their seats. And on the other hand, we can also see that it's an Islamic country with Islamic law. So how does it work out in reality? Thank you.
Pakistan is like many other countries of the greater Middle East in that there is a form of democracy. There is a parliament, there are parties, there are big debates, but you don't vote for the big guy. He's there without elections. He has ultimate control over the military, the police, the courts. The prime minister, who you do vote for, deals with education and infrastructure. The range of candidates is a narrow one. You have to accept the basic ideology of the state, and the voters have to be selected as well. So it's a form of democracy. It's not as though there's no democracy. There is some way for the public to participate and express itself, but it's limited. It is a shadow of democracy, and that's the case in Pakistan. So Islamic law, Sharia, can take precedence over this shadow democracy.
Definitely.
Just one comment on that, if I may. We have a very large Pakistani Muslim population in the UK, and so we've, like I said earlier about other issues, we've been learning fast about aspects of this. Let me give you an example. One of the most significant events in Pakistan in recent years was the assassination of the governor of the Punjab, Salman Taseer, who was assassinated some years ago by one of his own bodyguards because the governor had made comments in the wake of the Asia Bibi case to the tune of the fact that the blasphemy laws in Pakistan ought to alter. And for this, he was assassinated by this person who was meant to be looking after him. His name is Qadri. Now, I mention this because Qadri was himself then tried and executed. And among the clerics who spoke at massive rallies in Pakistan after the funeral of the assassin were two men who every summer come to the UK and tour. I've written about this at the Gatestone Institute website several times. There's no wider pickup on this point. But every year, the two people who were standing, whipping up a crowd of thousands and thousands of Muslims in Pakistan, saying that we would like to emulate the assassin, not the assassination, the person who was assassinated, but we would like to emulate the assassin. Those two clerics come, I think for the last 5 years, to the UK. They do big sellout tours of mosques all across England. 3 years ago when they came, they were welcomed. First of all, it sounds like I'm here tonight just to attack subsequent holders of the title of Archbishop of Canterbury, but allow me one more go. The guy who succeeded the person I was attacking earlier, who's now the Archbishop of Canterbury, welcomed these two clerics at Lambeth Palace on the beginning of their tour. And I mention this because in no other circumstance in a society like mine would this happen. If there was a crazy Christian or any other group, and there were men who were pro-assassinating officials, they would not be welcomed by Christian leaders or political leaders. They wouldn't be allowed to speak as they were in the Prime Minister's own constituency, Theresa May's own constituency at a mosque. So this is another example of this thing of us having to catch up very fast with unalterable facts about our society. I don't know whether we can do it or not, I don't know, but heck of an experiment, isn't it?
I thank the audience for the active participation, and I apologize, but our guests and I guess all of us are quite tired. It's 10:30. So if you wish, I would give the floor for very short closing remarks for our guests. Mosab, would you begin?
As long as you promise to keep it short. You know, the reason we are here, not because we are against the Muslim people. The law was made for man. Man was not made for the law. I don't remember who said that. Now, whether if it's Islamic law or other laws, man should always be above and beyond. We have sacrificed the law, and we went against the flow of our society. Somebody like Ayaan, really courageous and very inspiring, actually, to hear about you, to know that you exist, you know, because sometimes you start to feel, oh my God, I'm alone in this. But we are not alone. It's a destructive force, and everybody promised us self-destruction. They said, that's it. You will be shunned, you will be killed, you won't have a chance even to live. But here we are living, and we are living a much higher potential than any Islamic promise or any actually other human law that promises anything. We live and we continue to inspire others to think for themselves, to doubt, not to be afraid, and to come to freedom. This is why we exist. We're not here to debate, what's wrong and what's right. It's all bunch of garbage, made in the 7th century. I cannot believe, some people really believe in it. But they're in desperate need for leadership. They're confused. They don't know what to do. This is why they're full in this web of delusion. We broke out of this web of delusion. Ayaan and I and a few others look forward the day that millions of not only Muslims, but also many other human beings who are stuck in religious dogma and intellectual dogma to break free and come to freedom, to a place beyond mind and beyond intellect. Thank you so much for listening to us.
Daniel?
I echo what Mosab has said. We live in an age of globalization, and some of us, and our work is dismissed as we are being parochial and nationalist. No way. We are being globalist, just as Mosab said, where we connect and congeal with ideas of freedom and critical thinking. And I want to thank Matthias Corvina's Collegium for doing exactly that, bringing all of these people from different backgrounds and all over the world to come and congeal and fight for what we believe in, which is the ideas of liberty, the Enlightenment, freedom, critical thinking. And thank you so much for giving us this platform.
Douglas, Daniel, Mosab, and Ayaan, on behalf of MCC and I guess on behalf of Hungary, huge thanks. Thank you for coming.
It's 2025. America's debt is over $37 trillion, and the dollar just had its worst crash since 1973. That puts your savings and your family's future at risk. That's why we trust Alpha Omega Gold, a company that stands unapologetically with Israel and supports Stand Tall Israel. Visit ao.gold/stand to claim your free precious metals wayfinder guide or call 1-855-426-4653 today. Protect your future before it's too late.